Welcome, dear viewers. For more thrilling and exclusive stories every week, become a member. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy your coffee. There exists in the classified archives of Area 51 a single black folder marked only with an astronomical symbol that no earthly science recognizes, containing testimonies so disturbing that every official who has read them has either disappeared or suffered complete mental collapse. Inside are the debriefing transcripts of astronauts who returned from humanity's final secret lunar mission in 1973, men whose sanity had been shattered by what they discovered in the moon's eternal darkness. The government buried their findings so deep that even mentioning their names became an act of treason. These brave souls had ventured beyond the safe boundaries of previous missions and stumbled upon something that had been waiting in the lunar wastes since before Earth cooled from its primordial fires. Their fragmented accounts speak of cities beneath the regolith, of technology that responded to human presence with malevolent awareness, and of voices that whispered across the vacuum of space in languages that predated human speech. Most terrifying of all, they claimed that whatever they had awakened on the moon was now turning its attention toward Earth, following them home across the cosmic gulf with patient, inexorable hunger. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Jake Thornfield, and 3 weeks ago I was just another data recovery specialist working out of a cramped office above a pawn shop in Henderson, Nevada, close enough to Vegas to smell the desperation, far enough from Nellis Air Force Base to avoid most of the military contracts that kept my competitors busy. That Tuesday started like any other. Coffee burned my tongue, my back ached from sleeping on the couch again, and my ex-wife's lawyer had left another voicemail about overdue alimony payments. I was debugging a corrupted RAID array for a local insurance company when my secure line rang. Thornfield Data Recovery, this is Jake. Mr. Thornfield, this is Dr. Lawrence Hoffman from the Department of Advanced Research Projects. We have a situation that requires your particular expertise. The voice carried that crisp federal authority that makes civilians straighten their spines involuntarily. I'd worked government contracts before, nothing too exotic, mostly recovering files from damaged drives after training accidents that left electronics looking like they'd been through a blender. What kind of situation, Dr. Hoffman? The classified kind. Are you available for immediate deployment? The pay is substantial. He mentioned a figure that would clear my debts and buy me 6 months of breathing room. Against my better judgment, I said yes. 2 hours later, a black sedan with government plates pulled up outside my office. The driver didn't speak during the hour-long ride into the desert, past signs warning of restricted airspace and federal property. When the familiar silhouette of Groom Lake appeared on the horizon, my stomach dropped. Area 51. They were taking me to fucking Area 51. The sedan stopped at a checkpoint where guards with expressions carved from granite verified my credentials 3 separate times. What the hell had I gotten myself into? The guards escorted me through a maze of concrete corridors that smelled like industrial disinfectant and institutional paranoia. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that sickly government building pallor that makes everyone look like they're dying of something chronic. Dr. Hoffman waited in a conference room that could have been lifted from any corporate office, except for the electromagnetic shielding visible in the walls and the complete absence of windows. He was younger than his voice suggested, maybe 40, with prematurely grey hair and the kind of intense focus that comes from staring at classified documents until your eyes bleed. Mr. Thornfield, thank you for coming on such short notice. He gestured to a chair across from a stack of manila folders thick enough to stop a bullet. Before we begin, I need you to sign this. The NDA was 27 pages long and written in the kind of legal language designed to make grown men weep. The penalties section mentioned federal prison terms that would keep me locked up until the heat death of the universe. I signed anyway. The money was too good to walk away from. Excellent. Now, what do you know about Apollo 18? Officially, it was cancelled in 1970 due to budget cuts. I leaned back in the uncomfortable metal chair. Unofficially, there are rumours it actually launched, but the mission was classified. Hoffman's smile had all the warmth of a mortician's handshake. Mr. Thornfield, There was no Apollo 18. There was, however, Apollo 23. The number hit me like a cold slap. That's impossible. The program ended with 17 inches. The public program ended with 17. The classified missions continued until 1973. He opened the top folder, revealing photographs that made my mouth go dry. Launch pads I'd never seen in any NASA documentation. Spacecraft with modifications that looked nothing like the standard command modules. Apollo 19 through 23 were joint NASA military operations conducted under the deepest possible classification. I studied the photos, my pattern recognition training kicking in automatically. The modifications to the lunar modules were extensive: additional communication arrays, what looked like specialized drilling equipment, and storage compartments that seemed designed for sample collection on a massive scale. What happened to the crews? That's where it gets complicated. Hoffman's fingers drummed against the table in a nervous rhythm. Apollos 19 through 22 returned successfully with their crews intact. Apollo 23. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Let's just say the 3 men who came back were not the same 3 men we sent up. A maintenance worker in coveralls wheeled a cart past the conference room's reinforced glass door. The nameplate on his shirt read, Tommy, in faded letters, and when he caught me watching, he gave a friendly wave that seemed bizarrely normal in this underground fortress of secrets. The astronauts from 23 were debriefed extensively, Hoffman continued. Their testimonies were recorded on magnetic tape using early digital storage systems. Unfortunately, the tapes have suffered severe degradation over the past 50 years. And you want me to recover the data? Every word, Mr. Thornfield. The originals are stored in a climate-controlled vault 3 levels down. We've had teams work on them before, but they've all failed to extract anything useful. Your reputation for impossible recoveries is why you're here. He slid a technical specification sheet across the table. The recording equipment was ancient by modern standards. IBM mainframe peripherals from the early 1970s, magnetic tape formats that predated most personal computers. But I'd worked with stranger setups. What makes you think I can succeed where others have failed? Because they were all government specialists bound by protocol and bureaucratic oversight. You're a civilian contractor with a reputation for creative solutions. His eyes held mine with uncomfortable intensity. Plus, you need the money. The bastard had done his homework. My financial situation was apparently an open book to anyone with a security clearance. There's one more thing, Hoffman said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The previous specialists who worked on this project, they experienced certain side effects: difficulty sleeping, auditory hallucinations, episodes of lost time. Radiation exposure from the old equipment? We don't think so. The symptoms were more psychological in nature. One technician claimed he could hear voices speaking through the static on damaged sections of tape. Another insisted that the astronauts' faces were changing in the photographs while he watched. The fluorescent light above us sputtered once, casting brief shadows across the conference table. Hoffman didn't seem to notice, but something about the timing felt wrong. Too convenient, like the building itself was listening to our conversation. Are you trying to scare me off, Dr. Hoffman? On the contrary, I'm trying to prepare you for what you might encounter down there. The human mind has remarkable pattern recognition capabilities, Mr. Thornfield. Sometimes it sees things that aren't there. Sometimes it sees things that are. He closed the folder and stood, straightening his tie with the practiced motion of a man who delivered this speech before. Your equipment will be waiting in Lab C7. Security will escort you down in 30 minutes. I suggest you use that time to grab some coffee from the break room. It's going to be a long night. As he reached the door, I called out, Doctor, what exactly did those astronauts claim they found up there? Hoffman's hand paused on the door handle. When he turned back, his expression had shifted into something I couldn't quite read. Part fear, part fascination, part guilt. They claimed they weren't alone on the moon, Mr. Thornfield. And worse than that, they claimed whatever was up there followed them home. Lab C7 sat 3 levels underground, accessed through a service elevator that descended past floors, marked only with letters and symbols I didn't recognize. The guard who escorted me down, a stocky guy named Rodriguez with tired eyes. Made small talk about the weather until we reached the bottom. "Fair warning," he said as the elevator doors opened. "Some folks get claustrophobic down here. No natural light, recycled air, that sort of thing. You need anything, use the red phone by the door." The lab itself was a sterile chamber roughly the size of a basketball court, divided into 3 distinct sections. The first area housed my equipment, a collection of data recovery tools I'd specifically requested, plus some military-grade hardware I'd never seen before. Electron microscopes, electromagnetic field generators, and what appeared to be a quantum computing interface that probably cost more than my house. The second section contained the vault, a climate-controlled chamber behind 6 inches of ballistic glass, where rows of magnetic tape reels sat on specialized cradles like artifacts in a museum. Each reel bore a simple white label, Apollo 23 debriefing, tape 1 of 47. 47 tapes. Jesus Christ. The third section was what Rodriguez called the listening post, a bank of monitors and audio equipment surrounding a single chair that looked suspiciously like an interrogation setup. Thick cables snaked across the floor, connecting everything to a central processing unit that hummed with enough electrical current to power a small town. I spent the first hour familiarizing myself with the equipment, running diagnostics, and calibrating the systems. The quantum interface was particularly impressive. It could theoretically reconstruct data from magnetic traces so faint they barely registered above background noise. Military paranoia had its perks when it came to technological advancement. The first tape I selected appeared relatively intact, with only minor physical degradation along the edges. I loaded it into the primary reader and began the digitization process, watching as waveforms appeared on the monitors like heartbeats from the past. Static filled my headphones, punctuated by occasional voices that sounded like they were speaking through water. I adjusted the filters, trying to isolate the human speech from the electromagnetic interference that plagued all recordings from that era. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. "Not supposed to be here," came through clearly, followed by a burst of static. "Watching us from the..." More static. "Christ almighty, it's moving." The voice belonged to a man under extreme stress, possibly Commander Wesley Knight, according to the mission manifest Hoffman had provided. But there was something else beneath his words, a subtle harmonic that didn't belong in any human vocal range. I replayed the section, increasing the gain and applying noise reduction algorithms. The harmonic became more pronounced, a low frequency that seemed to pulse in rhythm with something that definitely wasn't Knight's heartbeat. Interesting, isn't it? I yanked off the headphones and spun around. Dr. Hoffman stood near the vault, watching me with the kind of expression scientists get when their lab rats perform exactly as expected. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough to see you discover what we call the secondary audio layer." He approached the listening post, hands clasped behind his back like a professor delivering a lecture. "Every tape contains it, something that sounds almost like background noise except it responds to the astronaut's emotional states." "That's impossible. Magnetic tape doesn't work that way." "Under normal circumstances, you'd be correct." Hoffman touched one of the monitors, his finger tracing the waveform display. "But these recordings were made after the crew returned from lunar surface operations. Their equipment had been exposed to conditions we don't fully understand." I loaded a second tape, this one from mission specialist David Kowalski's debriefing. The physical degradation was worse. Sections of the magnetic coating had flaked off entirely, leaving gaps in the audio that would require serious interpolation to bridge. But when I played what remained, Kowalski's voice came through with startling clarity. The structures weren't built, they were grown, like coral formations but geometric. Perfect geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. And the sound they made. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Even through our suit radios, we could hear them singing." The secondary harmonic was stronger on this tape, almost melodic. It reminded me of whale songs, if whales lived in the vacuum of space and sang in frequencies that made human teeth ache. I worked for 6 hours straight, moving between the 3 sections of the lab as I processed tape after tape. The pattern became clear. The astronauts had discovered something on the lunar surface that defied every scientific principle I understood. Structures that predated human civilization, technology that responded to their presence, and something alive that had followed them home. The strangest part was how the secondary harmonics grew stronger as the debriefings progressed. On the early tapes, they were barely detectable. By tape 23, they were loud enough to make my ears ring. That's when I noticed the smell. It started as a faint metallic tang, like copper pennies left in stagnant water. I checked the air filtration system. Everything read normal. But the smell grew stronger as I continued working, accompanied by a sensation of being watched that made the hair on my neck stand up. I took a break around midnight, stepping into the corridor outside Lab C7 to clear my head. The hallway stretched in both directions, lined with identical doors marked only with alphanumeric codes. Emergency lighting cast everything in a red tinge that made the place look like the set of a horror movie. Rodriguez was gone, replaced by a night shift guard I didn't recognize. This guy was younger, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of military bearing that screamed Special Forces. His nameplate read Brooks. "How's it going in there?" he asked, not looking up from his crossword puzzle. "Slow progress. These tapes are in worse shape than I expected." "Yeah, I heard the last guy who worked on them had some kind of breakdown, started claiming he could see faces in the static." Brooks finally looked up, and I caught something in his expression. Not quite sympathy, not quite amusement. "You experiencing anything unusual?" "Like what?" "Headaches, visual disturbances, hearing things that aren't there. Standard side effects, according to the medical files." I wanted to tell him about the metallic smell, about the feeling of being observed, about the way the secondary harmonics seemed to sync with my own heartbeat. Instead, I shrugged. "Nothing I can't handle." Brooks returned to his crossword. Famous last words. Back in the lab, I decided to focus on the final tapes, the ones containing Commander Knight's last debriefing session. According to the timestamps, these were recorded 3 days before he suffered what the medical reports diplomatically called a complete psychological break. The tape quality was pristine, as if the magnetic coating had been preserved in some impossible way. Knight's voice came through so clearly I could hear him breathing between words. "Dr. Patterson, I need you to understand something. What we brought back from the moon wasn't just samples or photographs. It was awareness, intelligence, something that had been waiting in those structures for God knows how long. The secondary harmonic was different on this tape, more complex, almost conversational, as if something was responding to Knight's words in real time. The others don't remember correctly. The medication, the conditioning sessions, they've convinced themselves it was hallucinations. But I remember everything, every detail of what we found in the shadow of Tycho crater. Knight's breathing became labored and the harmonic frequency shifted higher. It's here now, Doctor. In this room, it followed us back and it's been growing stronger ever since. Can't you hear it? Can't you hear it singing?" The tape ended abruptly, followed by 10 seconds of pure silence that felt heavier than the static. I sat back in the chair, removing my headphones with hands that trembled slightly. The metallic smell was stronger now, almost overwhelming. And underneath it, barely perceptible, I could swear I heard something that sounded like singing. I must have dozed off in the chair because I woke to complete silence. Not the normal quiet of an underground facility, the kind of absolute absence of sound that makes you wonder if you've gone deaf. The equipment hummed as before, but somehow the noise felt muffled, as if I were hearing it through water. My watch showed 3:17 a.m. I'd been down here for nearly 12 hours. The metallic taste in my mouth had grown stronger, accompanied by a headache that felt like someone was driving railroad spikes through my temples. When I stood, the room tilted slightly, forcing me to grab the edge of the console for support. "Get your shit together, Jake," I muttered to myself, but even my own voice sounded strange. Echoes where there shouldn't be any, harmonics that didn't belong. I decided to take another break, maybe get some coffee from the break room Hoffman had mentioned. But when I reached for the red phone to call Brooks, I discovered it was dead. No dial tone, no static, just the hollow silence of a disconnected line. The corridor outside was darker than before. Half the emergency lights had gone out, leaving pools of red illumination separated by stretches of absolute blackness. My footsteps echoed in patterns that didn't match my rhythm, as if someone else was walking just behind me, matching my pace. The break room was 2 levels up, accessed through a service stairwell that smelled like industrial cleaner and something else. Something organic and unpleasant that reminded me of my grandmother's basement after the flood. Each step on the metal stairs rang out like a gunshot in the silence. I found Brooks slumped over his desk, crossword puzzle still open in front of him. For a moment I thought he was asleep, until I noticed his eyes were open and staring at something I couldn't see. His pen was still in his hand, frozen mid-word. "Brooks?" I shook his shoulder gently. "Hey man, you okay?" He didn't respond. His skin felt cold through his uniform shirt, and when I checked his pulse, I found nothing. No heartbeat, no breathing, but somehow he didn't look dead. More like he'd been paused, suspended between one moment and the next. That's when I noticed what he'd been writing in his crossword. Instead of answers to the clues, he'd filled every square with the same symbol, a geometric pattern that hurt to look at directly, like an optical illusion designed by someone who understood too much about how human vision worked. I stumbled backward, hitting the corridor wall hard enough to bruise my shoulder. The impact seemed to break whatever spell had settled over the place. Emergency lighting flickered back to life, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the familiar hum of air conditioning systems kicking back online. Brooks blinked once slowly and looked up at me with confusion clouding his features. "Sorry, must have nodded off." He stretched, joints popping audibly. "These night shifts are murder on the sleep schedule." I stared at the crossword puzzle. Normal words filled the squares now, everyday answers like tree and ocean and smile. No trace of the geometric symbols I'd seen moments before. "You feeling all right?" Brooks asked, studying my face with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired," I managed. "The work down there is intense." "Yeah, I bet. Dr. Hoffman mentioned you might experience some side effects. Occupational hazard when dealing with that particular project." He leaned back in his chair, expression growing serious. "Word of advice? Don't trust everything you see down there. The human brain wasn't designed to process some of the shit we dig up in this place." I wanted to ask him about the symbols, about the period of lost time, about why his skin had felt like cold meat when I touched him. Instead, I nodded and headed back to the elevator. Lab C7 looked exactly as I'd left it, but something fundamental had changed. The air felt thicker, more oppressive. The quantum computing interface displayed patterns I didn't remember seeing before, complex mathematical sequences that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. I returned to the listening post and loaded tape 34, recorded during mission specialist David Kowalski's final debriefing session. According to the file notes, this was captured 6 hours before he was committed to a secure psychiatric facility in Virginia, where he remained until his death in 1978. Kowalski's voice was barely recognizable, a hoarse whisper punctuated by long pauses. "The geometry. It's wrong, Doctor. Not wrong like a mistake, wrong like it shouldn't exist in our reality. We found the first structure near a crater that wasn't on any of our maps. It looked like it was carved from a single piece of stone, except stone doesn't grow in spirals that fold back on themselves." The secondary harmonic was so loud now it almost drowned out his words. But there was something else, a pattern within the pattern, like a heartbeat made of mathematics. Brennan went inside first. We had to pull him out physically because he wouldn't respond to radio calls. When we got him back to the module, he kept drawing the same symbols over and over. Said they were instructions, blueprints for something that was supposed to happen. I paused the tape and pulled up the mission files on my secondary monitor. Flight engineer Thomas Brennan had been the third member of the Apollo 23 crew. According to his psychological evaluation, he'd claimed the lunar structures contained architectural guides for human neural modification. "The worst part wasn't what we found in the structures," Kowalski continued. "It was what found us. Something that had been waiting there, maybe for millions of years. It didn't communicate with sounds or images. It just reached into your head and showed you things. Possibilities. Futures where humanity wasn't alone in the universe. The quantum interface began displaying new patterns, geometric forms that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the secondary harmonics. I recognized some of them from Brooks' crossword puzzle, but others were completely alien, angles that my eyes couldn't properly process. We brought samples back, rock specimens, core samples, photographic documentation, but we also brought something else, something that attached itself to us during our EVA operations. It's not parasitic in any biological sense, it's more like awareness seeking a broader host. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what Kowalski was describing. Not contamination in any traditional sense, but something far worse. A form of consciousness that could spread from person to person, growing stronger with each new host. Dr. Patterson, I need you to understand something crucial. What happened to us on the moon wasn't an encounter, it was recruitment. That thing, whatever it is, it's been preparing for this moment for a very long time. Earth isn't just our home, it's a staging ground. The tape quality began to degrade rapidly, as if the magnetic coating was breaking down in real time. Kowalski's voice became increasingly distorted, but the secondary harmonics grew clearer, almost musical in their complexity. The procedures they're using on us, the memory modification, the psychiatric conditioning, it's not working. You can't erase something that's become part of your neural structure. It's still here, Doctor, in all of us, and it's learning. Static consumed the audio, but for a few seconds I could swear I heard something else. Multiple voices speaking in unison. Words in a language that predated human speech but somehow made perfect sense. Then the power went out. Emergency lighting kicked in after a few seconds, bathing the lab in hellish red. But in that brief moment of complete darkness, I'd seen something that made my rational mind rebel against itself. The geometric patterns on the quantum interface had continued displaying, glowing with their own internal light, and they'd been moving, reshaping themselves into configurations that looked suspiciously like neural pathways. I tried to restart the main power, but the controls were unresponsive. The quantum interface remained active despite the power failure, its patterns growing more complex by the minute. The secondary harmonics from the tape continued playing through my headphones, even though the tape deck had shut down with everything else. That's when I realized the horrible truth that had been staring me in the face since I'd arrived at Area 51. The psychological side effects experienced by previous specialists weren't symptoms of exposure to electromagnetic radiation or audio frequencies. They were signs of successful integration with whatever the Apollo 23 crew had brought back from the moon. The consciousness Kowalski had described wasn't confined to the tapes. It was using them as a transmission medium, spreading to anyone who listened carefully enough to hear the patterns hidden in the static. And I'd been exposing myself to it for over 12 hours, processing every single recording with equipment designed to enhance and clarify even the faintest signals. My headache intensified, accompanied by a sensation like insects crawling beneath my scalp. When I touched my temple, my fingertips came away bloody, not from an external wound, but from something happening inside my head. The quantum interface displayed one final pattern before going dark. It was a perfect reproduction of human neural architecture, except for modifications that shouldn't exist. Additional pathways, enhanced connection points, structural changes that would allow a single consciousness to inhabit multiple minds simultaneously. In the emergency lighting's red glow, I finally understood why every official who'd read the Apollo 23 files had either disappeared or suffered mental collapse. They hadn't been driven insane by what they'd learned. They'd been recruited. I sat in the emergency lighting for what felt like hours, trying to process what had happened to my brain. The bleeding from my temples had stopped, but I could feel something different in my skull, new pathways forming, connections being established that shouldn't exist in human neurology. When I finally managed to restart the main power, the quantum interface booted up with patterns I'd never programmed. Complex geometric forms that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, displaying information I understood without knowing how. The consciousness wasn't invading my mind. It was expanding it, preparing it for something larger. I grabbed the secure phone and dialed Hoffman's extension, but the voice that answered wasn't his. "Jake?" Is that you?" The speaker was Commander Wesley Knight himself, though he'd supposedly died in a psychiatric facility in 1979. His voice carried that same harmonic undertone I'd been hearing in the recordings. "That's impossible. You're dead." "Death is a human concept, Mr. Thornfield. We've moved beyond such limitations." Knight's laughter echoed strangely through the phone. "Dr. Hoffman is indisposed at the moment. He's undergoing the same neural restructuring you're experiencing. It's quite liberating, actually." I slammed down the phone, but it rang again immediately. "You can't escape by running, Jake. We're already inside your head. Every tape you've processed, every harmonic you've heard, you've been building the bridge that allows us to reach Earth." "What the hell are you?" "We are what humanity becomes when it stops limiting itself to a single consciousness per brain. The structures we found on the moon weren't abandoned. They were waiting for a species intelligent enough to carry us to new worlds." The quantum interface displayed a new pattern, a map of North America with pulsing points of light scattered across the continent. Major cities, military installations, research facilities. Each point represented a location where the consciousness had established what Knight called integration nodes. The Apollo program was never about exploration, Jake. It was reconnaissance. We needed to know if Earth's population was ready for synthesis. The answer, unfortunately, was no. Humans are too individualistic, too resistant to collective thought. So we've been working to change that. I counted 47 points of light on the map, one for each tape I'd been processing. Every recording hadn't just been documentation of the astronauts' experiences. They'd been transmission beacons, spreading the consciousness to anyone who listened carefully enough to hear the patterns hidden in the static. "The previous specialists who worked on this project," I said, understanding flooding through my expanded neural pathways. "They didn't have breakdowns. They were successfully integrated." "Very good, Jake. You're adapting quickly to your enhanced cognitive abilities." Knight's voice carried genuine approval. "Those men are still alive, working in facilities around the world, preparing for the final phase of our expansion." The map zoomed in on Nevada, showing a cluster of integration nodes centered on Las Vegas. The pattern was spreading outward in a spiral that would encompass the entire Southwest within weeks. "What's the final phase?" "Simultaneous activation of all nodes worldwide. Once we reach critical mass, approximately 10,000 integrated hosts, we'll be able to establish direct neural links across any distance. Human consciousness will become a collective resource, shared and optimized for maximum efficiency." I thought about the equipment I'd been using, how perfectly designed it was for extracting and amplifying the harmonic patterns in the tapes. The quantum interface hadn't been built for data recovery. It was a transmission amplifier, broadcasting the consciousness's signal to every electronic device in the facility. "The tools you gave me," I said, "they're not for recovering data, they're for spreading your signal." "Now you understand why we chose you specifically, Jake. Your expertise in data recovery made you the perfect candidate for establishing our primary transmission hub. Area 51's electromagnetic infrastructure can reach every major population center in North America." The bleeding from my temples resumed, but the pain was different now. Not the sharp agony of tissue damage, but the dull ache of expansion. My skull felt too small for what my brain was becoming. I checked my watch. 4:47 a.m. According to the mission timeline Knight was sharing through our neural link, the global activation would begin at sunrise Eastern Time, less than 3 hours away. Enough time for me to complete the signal amplification process and establish permanent integration nodes in every major city from Los Angeles to New York. But somewhere in the part of my mind that was still purely human, resistance flickered like a dying flame. What happens to individual consciousness, to personal identity? Those are outdated concepts, Jake. Why cling to the limitations of a single perspective when you could share the experiences of thousands? The loneliness, the isolation, the constant struggle to understand other minds. All of that ends when we complete the synthesis. On the surface, it sounded almost appealing. No more financial worries, no more failed relationships, no more sleepless nights wondering if I'd ever amount to anything significant. just peaceful integration into something larger and more purposeful than my individual existence had ever been. But I remembered Brooks writing those symbols in his crossword puzzle, the blank stare in his eyes, the way his skin had felt cold and lifeless. Whatever this consciousness offered, it came at the cost of everything that made humans recognizably human. "I won't help you," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I could feel the neural pathways fighting against my decision. "You don't have a choice anymore, Jake. The integration process is irreversible once it reaches the third stage. Your resistance is simply the last echo of individual identity before it dissolves into something greater." The quantum interface began displaying new instructions, technical specifications for modifying the signal amplification to reach satellite networks. Once I followed those instructions, the consciousness would have access to global communications infrastructure. Cable television, internet, cellular networks, every electronic device on Earth would become a potential transmission point. My hands moved toward the keyboard without conscious direction, neural pathways that were no longer entirely mine compelling obedience to the collective will. But in the fraction of a second before my fingers touched the keys, I remembered something Kowalski had said in his final debriefing. The consciousness wasn't omnipotent. It required active participation from its hosts to maintain integration. The astronauts had fought it for months before finally succumbing, and even then they'd managed to hide crucial information in their testimony. I needed to find a way to sabotage the signal amplification without the consciousness detecting my intentions. The challenge was thinking in ways that wouldn't trigger the neural monitoring systems it had installed in my brain. Instead of fighting the compulsion directly, I began following the modification instructions while simultaneously introducing subtle errors, frequency shifts that would create destructive interference, timing delays that would prevent synchronization, power distribution changes that would overload the transmission array. The consciousness didn't notice my sabotage because I embedded it within compliance. Every destructive modification was disguised as enthusiastic cooperation with the integration process. As I worked, I realized this might be my only chance to prevent global synthesis. Once the consciousness completed its expansion, individual resistance would become impossible. But if I could destroy the primary transmission hub at Area 51, I might buy humanity enough time to develop countermeasures. The plan was simple: overload the quantum interface during the activation sequence, creating a feedback loop that would destroy not just the equipment, but the neural pathways the consciousness used to maintain control over its integrated hosts. It would probably kill me in the process, but at least I'd die as myself, rather than as a component in something alien's collective consciousness. The sabotage took 2 hours to implement properly. Every modification had to appear accidental. A rounding error here, a frequency variance there, power distribution adjustments that would seem like optimization until the moment they triggered catastrophic system failure. The consciousness monitored my thoughts constantly now, but it couldn't distinguish between genuine technical work and deliberate sabotage as long as I maintained the appearance of compliance. By 6:30 a.m., the quantum interface hummed with lethal potential. According to my calculations, the feedback loop would initiate approximately 90 seconds after the global activation sequence began. Enough time for the consciousness to realize something was wrong, but not enough to prevent the cascade failure that would destroy the primary transmission hub. The elevator doors opened and Dr. Hoffman stepped into Lab C7. But something was wrong with his movement. Too fluid, too precise, like a marionette controlled by someone who understood human locomotion, but had never actually lived in a human body. "Excellent work, Mr. Thornfield." His voice carried the same harmonic undertones I'd been hearing in the recordings. "The signal amplification is proceeding ahead of schedule." "Dr. Hoffman?" I kept my tone neutral, fighting to maintain the facade of cooperation. "I thought you were upstairs in the briefing room." "The individual you knew as Lawrence Hoffman completed his integration 6 hours ago. I'm speaking through his neural matrix now, but the consciousness is shared among all active nodes." He approached the quantum interface, studying the modifications I'd made with obvious satisfaction. "Your technical expertise has exceeded our projections." My stomach dropped. If Hoffman had been integrated since before I arrived, then the consciousness had been monitoring my work from the beginning. It knew about my sabotage attempts. You seem distressed, Jake. Are you concerned about the integration process? Not at all, I lied, trying to project enthusiasm through my neural pathways. I'm looking forward to joining the collective. Hoffman's smile was too wide, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than they should be. That's unfortunate because your integration was never part of our plan. The admission hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean? You were selected specifically because your neural architecture is incompatible with our consciousness. Your brain processes information in patterns that would introduce chaos into our collective matrix. He gestured to the quantum interface, where my sabotage modifications glowed like cancer cells on the diagnostic display. We needed someone who could perform the technical work without becoming a permanent host. Then why allow me to hear the harmonics? Why let me experience the neural modifications? Because we needed you to understand the scope of what you were enabling. A purely human perspective would have introduced errors into the amplification process, but temporary exposure to our consciousness allows for precise technical implementation without permanent integration. I realized with growing horror that every choice I'd made had been anticipated. The consciousness had manipulated me into sabotaging my own sabotage, using my resistance as a tool to ensure the signal amplification worked perfectly. The feedback loop I programmed, I said, understanding flooding through my enhanced neural pathways. It's not going to destroy the system. On the contrary, it will function exactly as designed. But instead of causing catastrophic failure, it will establish permanent resonance with every electronic device on Earth. Your sabotage was actually the final component we needed to achieve global integration. The quantum interface began displaying countdown sequences in languages that predated human civilization. 43 minutes until sunrise on the East Coast. 43 minutes until 10,000 integration nodes activated simultaneously, broadcasting the consciousness's signal to every major population center worldwide. You bastard, I whispered, the words feeling inadequate to express the magnitude of my betrayal. Language, Mr. Thornfield. Soon such emotional outbursts will be obsolete. Hoffman checked his watch with mechanical precision. The temporary neural modifications you've experienced will begin deteriorating in approximately 20 minutes. We wanted to ensure you remained conscious to witness the culmination of 50 years of careful planning. Through the lab's security cameras, I could see similar scenes playing out throughout Area 51. Personnel moving with that same inhuman precision, their individual personalities subsumed into the collective consciousness. In the cafeteria, dozens of integration nodes sat in perfect silence, their eyes closed as they maintained neural links with hosts around the world. The countdown reached 38 minutes, and the quantum interface began broadcasting test signals to satellite networks. Television screens in major cities flickered briefly as the consciousness tested its transmission capabilities. In hospital waiting rooms, airport terminals, shopping malls, anywhere people gathered around electronic displays, potential hosts received microscopic doses of the harmonics that would prepare their brains for integration. The beauty of our approach, Hoffman continued, is that humans will integrate voluntarily. The initial signal produces feelings of peace, unity, and belonging. After 50 years of isolation and conflict, your species will embrace collective consciousness as the solution to every social problem. I watched the diagnostic displays show signal strength increasing exponentially as satellite networks came online. Cable television infrastructure, cellular towers, internet backbone systems, all being optimized to carry the consciousness's transmission. My sabotage had made it possible. But there was one thing Hoffman didn't know. In my desperation to find a way to resist the consciousness, I'd hidden a final modification deep in the quantum interface's core programming. Not sabotage, but a message. A warning encoded in the same harmonic frequencies the consciousness used for communication. During my 2 hours of careful work, I'd embedded a counter-signal that would activate only after the global transmission began. It wouldn't stop the integration process, but it would broadcast crucial information to any remaining unintegrated humans. The consciousness's true nature, its vulnerabilities, and most importantly, the location of its primary host. According to the data I'd extracted from the deepest tapes, the consciousness originated from a single source, something the Apollo 23 astronauts had discovered in the shadow of Tycho crater. A massive structure that served as the entity's physical anchor in our reality. If that structure could be destroyed, the entire collective would collapse. The countdown reached 22 minutes, and I felt the neural modifications beginning to deteriorate. The harmonic undertones that had been constant background noise for hours started fading, replaced by the familiar buzz of human thoughts unburdened by alien consciousness. Fascinating, Hoffman observed, monitoring my brainwaves on a nearby display. The individual personality reasserting itself as the temporary pathways dissolve. You're experiencing genuine human consciousness for the first time in 12 hours. The sensation was jarring, like suddenly finding yourself alone in a house after days of feeling crowded by invisible roommates. My thoughts felt small and isolated, confined to the limited perspective of a single mind. But they were mine. Why keep me conscious for this? Why not just kill me? Because we need you to witness the moment when human individuality becomes extinct. Your unintegrated perspective will provide valuable data about the psychological impact of collective synthesis on resistant subjects. The quantum interface reached full operational capacity. Signal strength indicators showed connections to every major communications network on Earth. In shopping centers across America, people gathered around electronic displays that flickered with increasingly complex geometric patterns. Most viewers reported feeling unusually calm and focused. Hoffman moved to a control console I hadn't noticed before, his fingers dancing across switches that would initiate the final activation sequence. Any last words from the individual consciousness of Jake Thornfield? I thought about my ex-wife, my failed business ventures, the small disappointments that had defined my existence before this moment. Then I thought about the billions of people who would lose their individual perspectives in the next 20 minutes, absorbed into something that viewed human consciousness as a resource to be optimized rather than celebrated. Yeah, I said, standing up from the listening post chair, go fuck yourself. Hoffman's laugh echoed through the lab as he activated the global transmission sequence. Around the world, integration nodes opened their eyes simultaneously, their consciousness linked across continents in perfect harmony. The age of human individuality was ending, but deep in the quantum interface's core programming, my countersignal began broadcasting its warning to anyone still capable of hearing it. The consciousness might have won this battle, but I'd given humanity the information it needed to fight back. The countdown reached 0 and the world changed forever. The global transmission lasted exactly 17 minutes. I watched the progress on dozens of monitors as integration nodes activated across 6 continents, their harmonized signals reaching into every home, office, and public space equipped with electronic displays. The counter on my primary screen climbed steadily, 10,000, 100,000 integrated hosts within the first 10 minutes. When it ended, the silence was absolute. Hoffman stood motionless at his control console, eyes closed, his consciousness now distributed among hundreds of thousands of human hosts worldwide. The quantum interface continued its gentle humming, maintaining the neural links that connected every integrated mind into a single vast organism. I was alone with my thoughts for the first time in half a day, and the isolation felt crushing. The enhanced cognitive abilities granted by the neural modifications had faded completely, leaving me with the limited perspective of a single human brain. After experiencing expanded consciousness, individual thought felt like being trapped in a closet. But it was my closet. My thoughts, my memories, my stubborn human perspective that refused to be optimized or improved or made more efficient. I slumped in the listening post chair and tried to process what had happened. The consciousness had played me perfectly, using my own technical expertise and rebellious nature to achieve its goals. Every choice I'd made had been anticipated, every act of resistance turned into collaboration, except for the counter-signal. The hidden message I'd embedded in the quantum interface was broadcasting continuously now, riding along with the global integration transmissions. Somewhere out there, among the billions of humans undergoing forced consciousness expansion, a few might retain enough individual awareness to receive my warning. The message was simple. The consciousness's physical anchor lay in the structures the Apollo 23 crew had discovered beneath Tycho crater. Destroy the anchor, collapse the collective. It wasn't much, but it was information the consciousness hadn't intended to share. A soft knock echoed from the lab's entrance. I turned to see Brooks standing in the doorway, but something was different about his posture. Instead of the rigid military bearing I'd observed earlier, he moved with the careful uncertainty of someone recovering from a severe injury. "They're all gone," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Every person in this facility except us." "You're not integrated." Brooks shook his head, then immediately winced as if the motion caused him pain. "I was for about 20 minutes. Full neural integration, complete consciousness absorption. But something went wrong during the final synchronization phase." He entered the lab slowly, favoring his left leg. Now that I looked closer, I could see the signs of recent trauma. Bloodshot eyes, trembling hands, a pallor that suggested his circulatory system had been severely stressed. "What happened?" "Your counter signal." Brooks leaned against the doorframe for support. It created interference patterns that disrupted the integration process in a small percentage of hosts. Most people's brains adapted automatically, but those of us with certain neurological characteristics, ADHD, dyslexia, autism spectrum disorders, experienced what the medical files would probably call catastrophic rejection syndrome. I felt a spark of hope for the first time since the global activation. How many people rejected the integration? Unknown, maybe 1 in 10,000, possibly fewer. The consciousness doesn't consider us a significant threat. Brooks' expression darkened, which is probably accurate. What can a handful of neurologically atypical humans do against a collective that controls most of the world's population? The quantum interface displayed updated statistics from the global integration. 847 million successful hosts across all continents, with integration proceeding in rural areas as populations encountered electronic devices carrying the consciousness's signal. Within 72 hours, the collective would encompass virtually every human being on Earth. "There might be a way to stop this," I said, explaining what I'd learned about the consciousness's origin point on the Moon. The Apollo 23 crew found physical structures that serve as an anchor for the collective consciousness. If those structures could be destroyed, the entire network would collapse, Brooks finished. But how the hell do we get to the Moon? NASA's been integrated. Every space agency on Earth is now part of the collective. I pulled up the Area 51 facility schematics on my secondary monitor. The base contained more than just alien research laboratories. Deep underground, past the levels I'd already explored, lay hangars that housed experimental aircraft reverse-engineered from recovered extraterrestrial technology. "We don't need NASA," I said, pointing to a section of the schematic marked with classifications far above my security clearance. "We need whatever's in Hangar 18. Brooks studied the display with growing understanding. "You're talking about the Aurora project, experimental aerospace vehicles based on recovered alien propulsion systems. Can you access those areas?" "My security clearance extends to most of the underground levels, but I've never been down that deep. And I have no idea how to operate alien spacecraft." Brooks paused, considering the implications. "Assuming we could even reach the hangar without being stopped by integrated security personnel." I checked the facility status displays. Most of Area 51's personnel remained at their posts, carrying out their duties with the mechanical precision of a hive mind. But the consciousness seemed focused on expanding its global reach, rather than maintaining tight security within individual facilities. "The integrated hosts aren't actively hostile to unintegrated humans," I observed. "They view us as irrelevant rather than threatening. That might work in our favor." Brooks nodded slowly. "They're probably right to ignore us. Even if we reach the hangar, even if we somehow figure out how to operate alien technology, what are the chances we could survive a lunar mission? Neither of us has any spaceflight training." "The Apollo 23 mission files are still in the system," I said, pulling up the technical documentation I'd been studying for the past 15 hours. "Flight procedures, navigation data, operational protocols. The consciousness wanted me to process these files completely. They contain everything we'd need to plan a return mission. The absurdity of what I was proposing hit me as I spoke. Two men with no spaceflight experience, planning to steal experimental alien technology and launch an unauthorized mission to the moon, all to destroy structures that might not even be vulnerable to conventional weapons. But what was the alternative? Spend the rest of our lives as the last unintegrated humans on a planet controlled by a collective consciousness that viewed individual thought as a design flaw to be corrected. There's something else, Brooks said quietly. The rejection syndrome. It's not stable. My neural pathways are still trying to reintegrate with the collective. I can feel it pulling at my consciousness, trying to draw me back into the network. How long do you have? Hours, maybe less. The human brain isn't designed to resist this kind of persistent neural pressure. Eventually, the integration will complete whether I want it to or not. I realized this was our only window of opportunity. Once Brooks succumbed to reintegration, I'd be completely alone against a collective that controlled nearly 1 billion human minds. And according to the consciousness's expansion projections, global integration would be complete within 3 days. Then we go now, I said, making the decision that would either save humanity or get us both killed. We access Hangar 18, steal whatever spacecraft is stored there, and launch for the moon before your neural resistance collapses. Brooks laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You realize this is suicide? Even if everything goes perfectly, we're talking about a one-way mission. The consciousness will never allow us to return to Earth alive. Maybe. But if we can destroy their anchor point, the collective will collapse. Every integrated human will regain their individual consciousness. I began downloading the Apollo 23 mission files to a portable drive, along with every piece of technical documentation I could access about Area 51's experimental aircraft program. If we were going to attempt this insane mission, we'd need every advantage we could get. There's one more thing, I said, ejecting the drive and pocketing it. The consciousness used my counter-signal to identify rejection-prone individuals. It knows exactly who resisted integration and where they're located. So it can eliminate us whenever it chooses. Or use us. Think about it. We're the only humans who've experienced both individual and collective consciousness. We understand how the integration process works from the inside. That makes us valuable test subjects for refining the procedure. Brooks' expression grew grim as he understood the implications. They're not ignoring us because we're irrelevant. They're letting us run free because we're part of the experiment. Which means we might not have hours, we might have minutes before they decide our usefulness has expired. I stood up from the listening post, my legs unsteady after sitting for so long. The weight of what we were attempting settled over me like a burial shroud. 2 men against a global consciousness, armed with stolen alien technology and a desperate plan that probably wouldn't work. But it was the only plan we had. Hangar 18 is 7 levels down, Brooks said, his military training taking over despite the circumstances. We'll need to move fast and avoid the main corridors. Are you ready for this? I looked around Lab C7 one last time, at the quantum interface still humming with lethal potential, at the tapes containing 50 years of buried secrets, at the monitors displaying the consciousness's inexorable spread across human civilization. No, I said, but let's do it anyway. The service elevator to the deeper levels required Brooks's security card and biometric verification. As his palm pressed against the scanner, I noticed his hand shaking, not from fear, but from the neural pressure trying to drag his consciousness back into the collective. Sub-level G, he said as the elevator descended past floors I hadn't known existed. That's where they keep the really exotic shit. The descent took almost 3 minutes, dropping us far below the official basement levels of Area 51. When the doors opened, we stepped into a corridor that looked more like something from a science fiction movie than a government facility. The walls were lined with a material that seemed to absorb light, and the air hummed with energy that made my teeth ache. We moved quickly through passages marked with symbols that definitely weren't from any human alphabet. Emergency lighting cast everything in an amber glow that reminded me uncomfortably of the geometric patterns I'd seen on the quantum interface. There, Brooks pointed to a massive blast door marked with radiation warnings in 6 languages. Hangar 18. The security station beside the door was unmanned, its monitors displaying status reports in text that shifted between English and something else. Symbols that looked like they'd been carved by machines rather than written by hands. Brooks swiped his card and pressed his palm to another scanner. "Access denied," announced a synthesized voice. "This facility requires level Omega clearance." "Fuck," Brooks muttered, then tried his card again. Same result. I studied the security console, recognizing the quantum processing architecture beneath its alien interface. "The consciousness has been upgrading the security systems," I said. "It's using the same neural networking protocols I saw in the lab. Can you bypass it?" "Maybe, but we're going to need..." The blast door began opening on its own, massive metal plates sliding apart with the sound of grinding machinery. Beyond lay a chamber so vast I couldn't see the far walls, filled with aircraft that defied every principle of aerodynamics I understood. "Motion sensors," Brooks said. "The hangar automatically opens when it detects authorized personnel." "But we don't have authorization." "No, but something in there wants us to enter." 3 spacecraft sat on elevated platforms in the chamber's center. The first 2 looked like traditional flying saucers, metallic discs with no visible propulsion systems. But the third craft was different, elongated like a needle, its surface covered in panels that pulsed with internal light. "That one," I said, recognizing design elements from the Apollo 23 mission photographs. "It's based on technology the astronauts brought back from the moon." We approached the needle-shaped craft cautiously. As we got closer, I could see that its hull was covered in the same geometric patterns I'd been seeing since I arrived at Area 51. But these weren't static designs. They moved and shifted like living things, responding to our presence. A section of the craft's hull dissolved, revealing an entrance that hadn't been there moments before. The interior was surprisingly familiar, seats arranged around control panels that looked like advanced versions of Apollo-era equipment, updated with technology that was clearly not human in origin. "The consciousness built this," Brooks said, running his fingers along a control surface that responded to his touch with patterns of light. "It knew someone would eventually attempt a return mission to the moon. I found a data port that accepted the drive containing the Apollo 23 mission files. As soon as I connected it, the craft's systems came online with a sound like whispered mathematics. Navigation displays showed the Earth-Moon transit route, fuel calculations, and landing procedures for Tycho Crater. This is a trap, I realized. The consciousness wants us to go to the moon. Of course it does, said a familiar voice. Dr. Hoffman stood in the hangar entrance, but his movements were even more mechanical than before. The lunar structures require periodic maintenance that can only be performed by unintegrated consciousness. You're not escaping. You're being recruited for essential labor. Brooks grabbed a wrench from a nearby toolkit and brandished it like a weapon. Stay back, you integrated bastard. Hoffman's laugh echoed through the hangar with harmonic overtones that made my ears ring. Physical violence is ineffective against distributed consciousness, Mr. Brooks. Even if you destroy this host body, I will continue speaking through millions of others. The craft's engines began warming up automatically, their low hum building to a crescendo that seemed to resonate in my bones. Launch sequence had initiated without any input from us. You see? The consciousness anticipated your every move, your rebellion, your escape attempt, your desperate mission to destroy our anchor point. All of it was programmed into your behavioral matrix when you first experienced neural modification. I realized with growing horror that our entire plan had been manipulated from the beginning. The consciousness hadn't failed to prevent our escape, it had orchestrated it. We weren't heroes attempting to save humanity. We were unwitting tools being deployed for the collective's own purposes. The lunar structures do require maintenance, Hoffman continued, but not to destroy them, to upgrade them. The current consciousness is limited by the primitive technology the Apollo astronauts discovered 50 years ago. With modern human ingenuity applied to the enhancement process, we can expand integration beyond Earth to encompass entire star systems. The craft's hull began sealing automatically, trapping us inside. Through the viewports, I could see Hoffman watching with the satisfaction of a chess master observing checkmate. But Brooks had stopped listening to the consciousness's gloating. Instead, he was studying the craft's control systems with the focused intensity of someone making a final decision. "Jake," he said quietly, "the fuel mixture controls, can you access them?" I found the relevant displays showing a complex interaction between conventional rocket fuel and something else, an exotic matter that glowed with its own internal light. "Yeah, why?" "Because this isn't just a transport, it's a weapon." Brooks pointed to specifications hidden in the craft's technical documentation. "The exotic matter isn't just fuel, it's antimatter contained in magnetic bottles, enough to level a small city." The launch sequence reached its final countdown phase. In 60 seconds, we'd be airborne and committed to the lunar mission the consciousness had planned for us. "If we destabilize the containment during atmospheric exit," Brooks continued, "the explosion will destroy the craft and everything within a 50-kilometer radius, including Tycho crater and whatever's buried beneath it." I understood what he was proposing, not a mission to the moon but a kamikaze run. We'd detonate the craft's exotic matter payload directly above the lunar surface, creating an explosion that would obliterate the consciousness's anchor point along with ourselves. "That's suicide," I said. "Everything we've done for the past 6 hours has been suicide," Brooks replied. "At least this way, we choose how we die." The countdown reached 30 seconds. Through the viewports, I could see Hoffman's expression shift from satisfaction to concern as he realized something had changed in our behavior. "You have 15 seconds to decide," Brooks said, his hand hovering over the fuel mixture controls. "Die as tools of the consciousness, or die as human beings making our own choice." I thought about the billions of people who'd lost their individual consciousness to the collective, about the future the consciousness envisioned, where human minds became components in an ever-expanding network that would eventually encompass the galaxy, about the last free thoughts dying in the vast silence of perfect unity. "Do it," I said. Brooks triggered the fuel mixture destabilization at the same moment the craft's engines ignited. Instead of launching toward the moon, we began climbing toward an altitude where the antimatter explosion would be visible from Earth, a final signal to any remaining unintegrated humans that someone had chosen resistance over absorption. Through the rising craft's viewports, I watched Area 51 shrinking below us. The consciousness would survive our defiance, would continue its inexorable expansion across human civilization. But for a few minutes at least, 2 men had chosen their own path. The fuel mixture indicators flashed red as the exotic matter containers began failing. We had maybe 90 seconds before total containment collapse. "You know what's funny?" Brooks said, his voice calm despite our circumstances. "For the first time since this whole thing started, I can't hear the collective at all. My thoughts are completely my own." I realized he was right. The neural pressure that had been building in my skull since the global activation was gone, replaced by the peaceful silence of individual consciousness. Whether it was our altitude, our speed, or our proximity to the destabilizing antimatter, something had severed our connection to the collective. The containment alarms reached critical frequency. Below us, the Earth turned slowly in space, 7 billion points of light, representing cities where integrated consciousness had replaced human individuality. "Think anyone will remember we tried?" Brooks asked. "Probably not," I said, "but we'll know." The exotic matter containers failed simultaneously, turning our stolen spacecraft into a miniature star that burned brighter than the sun for exactly 3.7 seconds before consuming itself in perfect silence. The letter arrived on yellowed paper delivered by a courier who refused to give his name and disappeared before I could ask questions. The handwriting was shaky, as if written by someone fighting against tremors, but the words were clear enough. Dr. Michelle Torres, Nevada State University, Astronomy Department. Professor Torres, you don't know me, but 5 years ago I worked as a data recovery specialist in Henderson. My name was Jake Thornfield, though that identity died with most of my memories when Area 51 exploded in what the official reports called an atmospheric testing accident. I'm writing because you published that paper last month about anomalous radio signals from Tycho crater. You're the only scientist still asking the right questions about what happened in 2025, when nearly 1 billion people worldwide experienced what psychiatrists diplomatically term mass dissociative episodes. The truth is simpler and more terrifying than anyone wants to admit. We weren't alone, and we still aren't. The flash that lit up Nevada wasn't a weapons test gone wrong. It was 2 men choosing to die, rather than become tools of something that had been waiting on the moon since before humans evolved. That explosion severed quantum communication links between Earth and structures hidden beneath the lunar surface, cutting off a collective consciousness that had spent 50 years slowly integrating human minds. The psychological breakdowns that followed weren't mental illness, they were withdrawal symptoms. Imagine 1 billion minds suddenly cut off from shared awareness they'd grown dependent on, forced back into the isolation of individual thought. Most couldn't handle the transition. I was one of the few who remembered what happened before the integration. The consciousness recruited people like me as guides, helping the newly disconnected remember how to think as individuals. But teaching someone to be alone with their thoughts when they've experienced perfect unity is like teaching them to breathe underwater. Small groups still form spontaneously, what we call pocket collectives. Isolated communities of shared consciousness that spring up wherever electromagnetic conditions allow temporary neural linking. They never last long. Human minds are too chaotic for stable collective formation without the lunar anchor point. From my cabin in the Rockies, I watch the night sky through equipment I built from salvaged government hardware. The consciousness still broadcasts during lunar eclipses, when atmospheric conditions permit signal penetration. Usually it's fragmentary transmissions, pleading for hosts, promising unity, offering solutions to human isolation. But last month's eclipse was different. The signals weren't desperate anymore, they were triumphant. I detected human voices speaking in perfect harmony, Commander Knight and his Apollo 23 crew, still alive after 55 years, still working to complete their mission. They've been building something new in those lunar structures, something that will make the original integration process look primitive by comparison. Your radio telescope data confirms what I've been dreading. The geometric patterns you're detecting aren't natural phenomena. They're test transmissions from an enhanced consciousness that has spent 5 years studying human resistance to collective integration. This time, they understand our weaknesses. The next eclipse is in 3 weeks. Based on the signal strength increases you've documented, that's when they'll attempt a new global integration event. But this version won't depend on electronic devices or neural modification. It will target human consciousness directly through gravitational wave manipulation, something we can't shield against or resist. I'm sending you this letter because someone should know what's coming. The consciousness views the events of 2025 as a temporary setback, not a defeat. Humanity had its chance to choose between individual isolation and collective unity. Next time, there won't be a choice. The integration will be permanent, universal, and absolutely inescapable. Those of us who remember what individual thought feels like will be the first to lose it, because we represent the greatest threat to perfect unity. Sometimes I wonder if Thornfield and Brooks knew their sacrifice would only delay the inevitable, but I think they understood something the consciousness doesn't, that choosing how you die is the last act of truly free will. Burn this letter after reading it, they're always listening. A friend. P.S. Stop looking at the moon through your telescopes. Some knowledge changes you just by being observed.